Chapter 23. The end? So, they reckon they'd caught Jesus good and proper this time. He'd said it himself after all, hadn't he? Had he? They dragged him off and made him stand up in front of Pilate. You remember, the guy from chapter 13, right? And started saying all kinds of things about him. He reckons he's the Messiah, our king. And he even told people they didn't have to pay their taxes. Pilate looked at the crowds and looked at Jesus. The crowds looked angry. Are you the king of the Jews? That's what you say, said Jesus. I don't think this man has done anything wrong, Pilate told the crowds. But he has, they shouted. He's been teaching things. He's been causing trouble everywhere he goes. He started in Galilee and now he's here, disturbing everything. Are you saying this is a man from Galilee? Asked Pilate. Right, well, it's not my job to judge him then, is it? If he's from Galilee, that's where Herod is in charge. Herod, who just so happened to be visiting Jerusalem, got quite excited when he heard that Jesus was being brought to him. He wanted to see if Jesus would do a miracle for him, just so that he could watch. When Jesus arrived, Herod asked him question after question, but Jesus didn't say anything. Because he wasn't speaking, the chief priests and temple people started shouting again, saying that Jesus had said and done all kinds of really awful things. They were getting angrier and angrier. So after a while, Herod and his guards started saying mean things to Jesus and pushing him around. They made him wear a fancy cloak and then sent him back to Pilate. Herod and Pilate had always hated each other, but now they had something in common: Jesus. Pilate pulled everyone together, the chief priests, temple guys, and some of the crowds. You told me this Jesus was causing trouble everywhere. Well, I've questioned him, and so has Herod, and I don't think he deserves to die. He's done nothing wrong. I'll have him whipped, and that will be the end of it. But the crowd shouted, Kill him! Kill him! Let someone else go free instead! That Barabbas guy, that murderer! If you want to let someone get away with what they've done, he'll do. Barabbas was a murderer, and he'd been in jail serving his time. It was a tradition that the governor would set one prisoner free around the Passover every year if he wanted. Pilate couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. So he told the crowd again that Jesus had done nothing wrong. Kill him! Kill him! Put him on a cross! Crucify him! But why? He hasn't done anything. I've told you, I'll get him whipped and beaten up. Surely that's enough, said Pilate. He was getting pretty desperate now. But the shouting didn't stop. In fact, it got worse and worse. The crowds were truly scary now, and eventually, Pilate gave in. He let Barabbas out of jail and gave Jesus to the crowd. Do what you want with him, he said as he walked away. Crucify? Crucifixion? Well, essentially, a person who is crucified is fastened onto two pieces of wood in the shape of a cross, which is stood up in a hole in the ground, and then they are left there until they die. Usually, the Romans put big, strong nails through their hands and feet so that the people could not escape. They almost always took all the clothes off the person on the cross too. Crucifixion was a long, slow, and painful death. And to make it even worse, when the Romans crucified people, they usually did it in a place where everyone could see. And sometimes, they even made people carry their own crosses all the way to the place where it would happen. The soldiers dragged Jesus away. On their way out of the city, they saw a man called Simon coming in from the fields, and they grabbed him and made him carry Jesus' cross along the road. Lots of people were still following Jesus even now. Many of the women were crying, and Jesus turned around to face them. Don't cry because of me. You should cry for yourselves and your children. There are terrible things coming, much worse than you can imagine. In those days, you'll wish you weren't here. If these things are happening to me now when I'm here with you, imagine what will happen when I'm not. There were 2 more men being crucified that day, and when they reached the place outside the city called the Skull, the soldiers fastened the men onto their crosses and lined them up side by side with Jesus in the middle. As Jesus hung there on his cross, he said, "Father God, please forgive these people. They don't know what they're doing." The soldiers were standing around, waiting for the end, and they were arguing about who should get to keep Jesus' clothes. They were rolling dice to see who would be the winner. The leaders who had wanted Jesus dead were standing around and were still shouting things at Jesus. "Look at him. He said he saved people. He can't even save himself, can he? If he's God's Messiah, that shouldn't be too hard." The soldiers shouted things at Jesus too. They even brought him some wine. "If you're the king of the Jews," they said, "come on down and save yourself." There was a sign above Jesus' head that said, "This is the King of the Jews." Even one of the other men being crucified shouted at Jesus, "You're supposed to be the Messiah, aren't you? Do some saving then. Save yourself. Save me." "Hey," shouted the other man, "aren't you afraid of God? You're on a cross because of all the awful things you did. We deserve to be here. It's our own fault. But this man, this Jesus, he never did anything wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus said, "I tell you the truth. I promise that even today, you will be with me in paradise." At around 12 o'clock, everything went dark. The sky was black. The sun had stopped shining. Everything stayed dark until the middle of the afternoon, when suddenly the curtain in the temple tore in two, and Jesus shouted out, "Father, into your hands I place my spirit." And then he died. When the Roman soldier in charge saw what had just happened, he called out to God, "This man was innocent." The crowds began to leave. As they went away, they were so sad. Jesus' closest friends and some of the women who had followed him all the way from Galilee stood in the distance and watched everything that happened. What was that thing with the curtain? Well, only the priests were allowed behind the curtain in the temple, where they believed God lived. When Jesus died and the curtain was torn in two, it meant that all the barriers between ordinary people and God had been taken away. Wow. A man called Joseph from a place called Arimathea was a member of Pilate's council. He was a good guy, and he had never been okay with what happened to Jesus. So he went to see Pilate and asked if he could take down Jesus' body from the cross. It was the least he could do. Joseph took Jesus' body and wrapped it in beautiful cloth. He then carefully carried it to a brand new tomb that had been carved out of the rocks and laid Jesus down inside. Some of the women were still following behind, and after they'd seen where Joseph had put Jesus' body, they went away to get some spices ready. Spices helped to stop things from smelling bad when someone had died, but the spices these women were getting ready for Jesus were expensive and precious. They showed just how special Jesus was. It was now Friday evening, and that meant that the Jewish Sabbath was about to begin. The women couldn't go back to where Jesus was. They had to rest.